to you. You're listening to the Music Business Buddy with me, Johnny Amos, podcasting out of Birmingham in England. I am the author of the book, The Music Business for Music Creators, available in hardback, paperback and ebook format. I'm a music creator with credits on a variety of major and indie labels as a writer-producer. I'm also a music business lecturer and a music creation lecturer. Wherever you are, whatever you do, consider yourself welcome to this podcast and to a part of this community. I'm here to try and educate and inspire music creators from all over the world in their quest to achieving their goals by gaining a greater understanding of the business of music. Okay, so the theme for this week's episode is longevity and strategy, and I am joined by an expert industry executive guest, Keith Jopling. Now, Keith is a really, really nice guy and a fascinating guy. I found in this interview with him, I was just kind of nodding along, learning, taking it all in, and just really, really enjoying listening to his brilliant mind. He is a former strategist for Sony Music. He is the former global head of strategic intelligence for Spotify. He is a founder of MIDIA Research. The list of his accolades continues to grow. He is an elite level strategist. He's also a superb podcaster, and he has a podcast called The Art of Longevity, where he interviews a range of music artists and music creators, and from that draws a great deal of inferences that offer an insight to music creators on how to build longevity. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over, and I hope with all my heart that you enjoy this interview as much as I did. Okay, here we go. Keith, thank you so much for being here as a part of the Music Business Buddy here today. I really, really, really appreciate it. I'm very excited to talk to you. How are you today?
Oh, very well. I'm glad to be here. I really love the podcast. I love what you're doing. So, yeah,
Well, that it means a lot to me when people say that, but especially a man of your caliber, Keith. So much appreciated. I've just been talking about the art of longevity, your podcast. As I've said to you before, I'm a big fan of what you do on there. Are you? This is a difficult question, but are you able to summarize any of the kind of secrets that have emerged from your podcast interviews that can point us towards the facets that enable longevity?
That's the $1 million question. That's why I did the project.
Yeah.
And I feel like, if this was a PhD, it's funny. I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about Brett Anderson because he inspired the whole thing and eventually came on the show. And he said to me, "Oh, this is cool. Is this like a school project?" And I said, "Well, it would be if I was 45 years younger, but it's more like a PhD. I mean, there's a lot to it, right? But you've asked me at the right time because I've just spent the last 4 weeks writing the manuscript of a book, which I will now be pitching like crazy to agents and publishers because I don't want to self-publish it. I want to try and get it published.
Yeah.
But
you want to go commercial or academic with it?
Well, here's the thing. You could probably advise me on this because at the moment it's sitting between being a business book. It's certainly not academic. It's practical, but it's sitting between being a business book and like a self-help book for artists, for creators in a way. And I mean, I don't know if you've got experience. I mean, you've published a book, so you've got some experience. You've got more experience than I have. But my sense is that book publishing, they just want to keep it all very simple. They need to know who this is aimed at before they take it on. So I've got to decide. But to come to your question, so I've been working on this, and the book is in 2 parts. So the first part is the 5 routes to longevity. And you need a combination of them, but there are 5. So I'll tell you what those are. And then the second part is themes and lessons. And there are 30 odd of those. And I'll probably keep going until I eventually get it published. And they're the little things. But to start with the 5 routes, so just very briefly, and then we can maybe pick 1 or 2, is you've got to have a hit record or you've got to have a big song. Right? And the 2 things are actually slightly different because the nature of hits is changing. You can make a classic album. Again, that's changed. what's a classic album now versus what it was 10 or 20 years ago is a debate, right? So with all of these, there's a sort of past, present, and future element. Getting dropped by a label, that's key. I mean, it implies you need to be signed in the first place, but it's getting dropped that's the rite of passage. And one of the amazing trends that I've found is so many of the guests that I've had on go on and make their best record creatively and commercially after they've been dropped. So it's on in the recovery. They dig deep. I mean, the label's probably kicking themselves, thinking, "Why couldn't you do this when you were signed?" But I mean, the reason they didn't do it is because there was something wrong in the environment, right? So getting dropped. The other one is being more than the sum of the parts. So having a brand. So yeah, and that's especially true now. So I'd love to get your view on this because we're not. There's more to music than music. It's highly visual. There's an incredible amount of music available to us all the time, being released all the time. So you've got to have something to say, and you've got to work like you are a brand, like you are a cultural brand, and work to the principles of branding, which is like integrated marketing communications. You've got to have a look. You've got to have a message. You've got to have the visuals down. I mean, I say to all bands now, get a videographer, have a good photographer, document everything that you make, because if you do make it up to the next step, your fans are gonna love this stuff. So yeah, build a brand. That's 4. I've forgotten what the 5th one is. Hang on, I've got some notes. Hold on.
There's so many artists now that spend even an entire day, a week, just filming content.
Yeah. I mean, and they're content creators, and a lot of them are railing against the idea. But I can talk about that in more detail because Chili Gonzalez was really great on that particular subject. Sorry, the 5th one is establish quiet legend. So, AKA cult status. So the whole thing with this, behind that, is building your fan base brick by brick.
Okay.
Because what often happens with bands of longevity is, I mean, most bands who've been on the podcast have obviously had a career of at least 10 years, but usually 20, 30, 40, 50 sometimes. So they built their careers before the whole digital streaming and social media era, in the old school days of, labels really pushing them, getting them on the charts, getting them on radio play, the old way. And then something would have happened where you can't possibly sustain that, and they will crash. They'll stop having hits. Their albums won't sell as much. They'll get dropped. They'll go through that process. And then they're left scratching their heads going, well, who are our fans? Who's our audience? And we need to build it up. We need to build it back up. Yeah. And inevitably that is through a completely different route. A bit of DIY, maybe signing with indie labels, just taking it step by step. So the cult status thing is, if you're a band starting out now, you need to do that from the beginning, because you can't rely on signing to a label being the route to success. It's the route to something, but it's not the route to longevity. That's up to you. That is all about building it brick by brick, follower by follower, fan by fan, from the beginning.
That's a very very, very interesting take, because what you just explained there was kind of the old bulletproof way of doing things, and it's something which I don't witness as much in this day and age when we chase, the instant world. So it's nice to hear you say that. I also think do you not think it's important as well that artists have a good idea of, who their fans are, so kind of, I've heard marketeers that will talk about, like, who's their fans, and I can't think where I was now when I heard it. I was in a meeting somewhere in London, and somebody said, "Oh, it's an indie rock." Okay, Vans or Converse? Oh, Converse. Oh, okay. And they'll just talk about brands that way and kind of be able to understand that, and I always think that's fascinating, because if Spotify were to go down, bang, and people don't know who their followers were or what they might look like in the street, then they can't quite build longevity, or at least the understanding of how to build it in the same way.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I mean, it's funny because going back pre-streaming, especially in my field, so I guess I come from a data-driven marketing background before it became a thing in music. You
Yeah.
know, that's what I did in the pharmaceuticals business. I ran a team
Oh,
we were called marketing development and operations, and it was a team of MBA analysts. But what they used to do was kind of challenge the marketing people and make them feel small. And I was like, we can't, look, this is not working. We've got to get some skin in the game here. You've got to dive in and help these guys because marketers at that time were never data driven. You know, this is going back at the start of the century, like 2000.
right. Okay.
Marketing wasn't ever data driven. It was always creative. It
Yeah.
was always commercial. It was person to person, one on one. It's either more like sales or more like advertising, right? That was marketing. And I came into the music business and I was always fascinated by things like plugging. I'm like, what is that a job? It's so crude. You know, you're literally just plugging songs to people in radio. Um, and so for ages, I was interested in making marketing a bit more like marketing in music. And so I worked with a lot of people in insight teams and things in labels, and they would do all of this profiling and research on who they thought the audience was for an artist. And I mean, it's really funny because when streaming came along, they found that they got a lot of that wrong. You know,
Okay.
they take an artist um, like Rag and Bone Man at Sony, and you know, you read his whole marketing profile that Sony had put together, thinking that his audience was kind of leaning under under 25 females, and actually, I think when they got the streaming data, they found okay, it's over 35 males. You know that's his audience. So I think you're right. The data
Wow.
is now giving you the pointers and you've got to be data driven. But if Spotify went down tomorrow, as you said, the other thing that I think artists have, and they're really good at, but they've never had a dialogue with the industry or the right person in the industry, is they've got a really good editorial feel for who their audience is. I mean, why wouldn't they? Every time they play a gig, they're looking right at them, you know.
Yeah.
And people in the live business have a better idea as well of who the audiences are because really they're the people who come and see you.
Yeah, I've kind of always thought that about the live side of things. Um, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for your insights on longevity, by the way, as well. I love it that you come into your work with that kind of objective viewpoint because around the time that you would have started to come into the industry, marketing largely for the major labels was about television, about talent TV shows and alignment of promotion with television and that kind of thing. Of course, a lot's changed since then, hasn't it? But looking to emerging music creators, and in fact, let's go a little bit more specific. If we were to talk about emerging recording artists, people that write their own songs and are looking to forge a career in the music business in whichever way, are there any fundamental pointers that spring to mind to you that they should be thinking about?
Yeah. And you know what? When I look at, I mean, I love new music.
Yeah,
I'm one of these people that's always constantly filtering and it raises my anxiety levels. I'm like, oh my God, I've got to listen to this next new band.
yeah,
Um, but I feel like I owe it to them in some way. And I know it to myself because I don't want to miss it. And I think there's more good music emerging now than there ever has been before, of an amazing quality in the production and in the songwriting.
yeah. I agree.
Um, and I think maybe it's so ultra competitive now that the problem is how do you stand out? And you have to stand out if you're going to stand any chance of having a long career. So I guess when you're starting out, there's a couple of pointers. Um, One's just a very practical thing about not going too soon. And, you know, there's been so much in recent years with the rise of TikTok and so on about you get that virality, or you drop something and it starts to pop. And before you know it, you're signed, or you're in a conversation about being signed. All of that is you're on a hiding to nothing really, unless you are exceptional. Really, it's the old-fashioned values. Take your time, practice your art, make sure you are working on the best songs. Um, don't release anything that you really don't think is your best work. You can do that
Yeah.
later,
Yeah.
but you've got to get your best work out there. And you've got to play live. You've got to just practice your art live, because that is ultimately where you're going to grow your real fan base.
Yeah.
And of course, that's changed recently. So we talk about that because we used to say that's where you're going to make your money, and that's no longer the case. But it is where you're going to build your fans. Now, that's all, you know, just old fashioned stuff. It's never going to go away, though. From a longevity perspective, there are a couple of things I would say as almost as like, you know, this take this as a tip. Have a manifesto. You know, you look at the history of really cool bands. There's always someone. Usually, it's the front person, but not always. Sometimes it's the guitarist, but someone's got the vision for that band.
Yeah.
Right through to thinking how we're going to look, what we're going to wear when we get up on stage. I interviewed Tim Rice-Oxley yesterday for the new episode, because they're celebrating the 20th anniversary of Keane, and they're releasing a book, and there's a page in that book where they call it the OK Computer test, and they've got the playing order of OK Computer, and then they've got the playing order of Hopes and Fears next to it. Before it was ever released, before it ever became anything like a classic album, they were applying a test to themselves, really, to see whether they had it or not, whether they really believed they had it. And it was part of a manifesto. And the other thing in their manifesto was their guitarist had left. So they decided, look, our thing is going to be more emotional rock, because we're not going to replace our guitarist Dominic. He's gone. So we're going to make it more keyboard led. And that became a thing for them, right? So, I mean, I look at somebody like Harry Styles, you know, when he left One Direction, he was going to build a solo career. What would people expect him to do? Make another pop record.
Yeah.
But his manifesto was, I'm going to go back to classic rock. I'm going to go back to Van Morrison, Bowie. He surprised a lot of people. And, you know, it's worked for him. It's really worked for him. So you've got to have a manifesto at the beginning, something that's going to guide you through it. It's got to be powerful.
Yeah. That makes so much sense. It's actually, I've not worded it that way before, but it is something that I talk to a lot of emerging artists about. The trouble is, it kind of goes a little bit against the grain of the muse for many. For instance, the idea of saying, right, I'm going to sit down and do this creatively kind of stunts creativity. Whereas if when we make music and then we try and figure out where it fits, that's where the art is. But that doesn't make money as well in the same way, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So there is a balance somewhere, you know.
That there is a balance. There is a balance. This is fascinating for me, though, because that's why I call it a manifesto, not a mission statement,
Ah,
because they're kind of the same thing. But, you know, mission statement is it's a little bit corporate, a little bit brandy. But your manifesto is different. You don't ever have to write it down if you're not, you know, if you're uncomfortable with that idea, or you think it's too much, like too contrived or too clinical.
mm,
You don't have to write it down, but you need to talk about it and bottle it somehow.
okay.
And James did this. I spoke to Tim Booth in one of the early episodes, still one of my favorite episodes, and that's the one he was in bed for.
All
And
right. Okay.
I
Yeah.
said, "Did you have a manifesto?" He's like, "Yeah, it was always to take risks and experiment." And they are known for that. And they go
Yeah.
on stage and play, and the set list is built on the fly. You know, you don't get
Uh,
a written set. And how many bands do that? I mean, very few bands have got the nerve to do that, right?
Yeah. Guns N'
But
Roses used to do that.
but it's in their DNA. They've done it from the beginning, so they're
Yeah.
comfortable with it. It's their
Yeah.
thing. So you don't have to. I mean, essentially, this is marketing. I'm talking about branding here, but in a way, this is what a commercial brand would kill for. I mean, a good marketer would give up a limb for that kind of authenticity. If you could build a business on a manifesto and never have to write it down, that would be super powerful. But we live in a corporate world where people are writing mission statements every 5 minutes and business plans that are this thick. I mean, bands don't do that. You don't have to, but it amounts to the same thing. It's
Yeah.
having a vision that's going to be a North Star for you to stick with when the going gets bumpy, because it's going to get bumpy.
Yeah, totally. I love that. That makes a lot of sense. I hope there's a lot of people listening to this now that are kind of going, oh, yeah, I need to do that. Yeah. Can I ask you about MIDIA? You are currently a consultant director for MIDIA, one of the giants of the music industry research world, right? What I mean, I know that we were talking about this earlier, and I didn't know that you were involved with the inception of MIDIA from the very beginning. It has been a bit of a game changer, right? And I know that your colleague Mark has worked very, very, very hard on building it into what it is. But what and this is probably a bit of an unfair question following this up now with that, but what subjects have come up that you are aware of that immediately come to your mind without thinking too hard that emerging music creators should be aware of when strategizing that sort of manifesto, if you will?
Well, let me take those separately. So I'm not at MIDIA now, right? First
Okay.
of all, I'm now an independent again. So
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
for 5 years I was consulting director at MIDIA, and
Okay.
sort of grew the consulting bit of the business more or less from scratch. But the brand was there and the brand was strong. So Mark had built the brand up from. You're right. The two of us started it at the very beginning, but I kind of walked off into the sunset. I didn't fancy it at the start, so he effectively founded it himself, and then he got his brother Tim and Carol, who was a mutual friend. They really built the business uh, from Mark just being himself, and they built it up to 12. And then they invited me for Christmas dinner in 2019, and Mark said, "Do you want to come back at this point?" And the reason I could say yes to that was, if you're going to build a consulting business, you need to build it off of brand. Again, I'm coming back to branding here. You
Yeah.
can't sell a piece of a piece of knowledge-based consulting work to anyone on the back of knowledge, expertise, methodology, none of that. What you need a brand,
Yeah.
and your brand is your calling card, and that's why people come to you. And Mark had built that, so I knew the brand was there. What wasn't there was the product, and it's consulting is different to research, right? Research, you can kind of research the subject you want, you could talk about what you want, you put it out there, and it's like putting a record out. Sometimes it's a hit, sometimes it's a miss. Doesn't matter. You move on, you just make another record, you write another report. Consulting is solving people's problems,
Yeah.
and people would come to you with a problem that could be just one sentence: how do we grow from here? Great, fantastic brief, love that. We had a lot of those, right down to really specific briefs. We did a piece of marketing work for Spotify that was all about, really, what can we offer to labels that are going to make a difference in marketing campaigns in 2021. Whenever we did that piece of work, they were really specific. But you're always solving problems,
Mm.
and you've got to focus on that problem. Or if they come to you with an unspecific problem, or you think their problem is another one, you've got to define that with them first, and then you've got to solve that. So it's a totally different discipline, but it was nice to work the two together. So I always said that consulting, we made the work of the analysts and the researchers more relevant, and they made our consulting work smarter and more
Oh, like that.
more future proof, if you like.
Okay.
But yeah, so yeah, I had 5 years there, and it's great business. And you're right, to build it up from scratch to be a brand that's recognized as like the go-to
Oh yeah.
in music research is amazing.
Oh, it's phenomenal. It is absolutely phenomenal entity, and it's where I look to for where are things headed. Because one of the best ways we can kind of figure out what the future is going to look like is to analyze the present, right? And to fully
Yeah,
understand where
and
we're
the
at.
past.
Well, the past
Yeah,
as well.
and
Yeah,
the
yeah,
past. I'm a big believer in looking at history because it tends to kind of repeat itself. Look where we are in the world, right?
yeah.
The proof is all around us.
Yeah, that's very, very true. That piece of research that you mentioned there, Keith, that then led you on to becoming the global head of strategic intelligence at Spotify in the London office. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah.
That's
So,
amazing.
um, yeah, initially I was a consultant to Spotify. So actually, I was working at a different agency, and we were pitching to Spotify. Live Nation was our big client, and I wanted to grow music, so we were pitching to Spotify. And actually, the people there were like, "What? We know who you are, but we don't know the rest of your team. So why don't you just come and work here?"
Okay.
Um, and so I did. I was a consultant there, and then it was they kind of invited me to. This is really was a kind of life lesson in a way. They said design your own job. Here's kind of what we don't know. We don't know what our positioning is vis-a-vis competitors. We don't know what the next big growth beyond music streaming is going to be. We've got a few ideas. Can you help us with that and write a job spec around it? So I wrote my own job spec, um, and and went into Spotify to do that job, uh,
Wow.
which is fine. That's great. The opportunity to do that is you should probably always take it, but it comes with a quid pro quo. It's like, well, now you have to explain to a lot of people what your job is
Yeah.
because no one went. That's the job. We want you to do it. It was like, these are kind of the things we're thinking of. Can you help us design your own job spec? So, there's a phrase that is often used in the world of work when you take a new job, which is it set up for success?
Yeah.
And that one was sort of bit of 50-50, bit equivocal. And I've been in that situation many times before. And initially, I would say MIDIA was that as well because they didn't do consulting; they did research.
Yeah.
So you go into a role and you think, I've learned a lot because I always think, right, I can do this. The agency I ran before I got that gig at Spotify, I went in to turn around the media, the telco media and tech side of the agency. And the two people they'd hired before me had failed. They'd been hired, they did 3 months, 6 months, and then they got fired. I was like, it's not a problem. I can do it. I know I can do it. You got to be careful.
You're as rock and roll as anybody I've ever met, really, Keith. Wow, I
Well,
love
if you
that.
can't, I mean, I tell you, this is something I used to talk to Mark about a lot at MIDIA. It's like, you've got this brand to a certain level. Don't make it boring, right?
Mm.
Don't go corporate because you've got to it's got to be a bit rock and roll, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. That's it's got to be uncomfortable in order to improve, right? And
I mean, the music business should be more rock and roll. There's a great quote. I think it's from an old country singer. I can't quite remember who said it. It might come to me, but the quote is, "We're in the fun business. It should be fun, as in
right.
working in the company should be fun." But in my experience, like, a lot of the bigger labels and I mean, even the streaming services, you could say this. I could say this about Spotify, Amazon, all of them, is they're very corporate. So they sort of designed almost in a way to take the fun out of it. And that doesn't seem right to me. If you're working with artists and you're trying to grow their business and their fan base with them, you should be making that work interesting and fun. Not
Yes,
just really,
yes.
really serious at work and then going out to a gig at night, or getting having a meet and greet with the artist and being able to tell your friend. But it's the work itself should be fun. So there's something wrong there in the culture, I think. But we could digress and be on that topic for the rest of the podcast.
Well, it would be a very interesting. Well, I mean, you're absolutely right. It is something I've thought about a few times over recent years. But one of the fundamental differences that I've observed between A&Ring in the UK and A&Ring in North America, huge broad statement coming ahead here now, but is the route into kind of A&R in the UK is passion and sometimes academia and network. And in America, it's far more through creative, through being a producer, working with artists, and kind of going in that way. And I think that those two approaches put people in the same position, but yield very, very different results.
Yeah.
And I think the Americans have got it a lot more rock and roll than we have in that
Well,
respect.
that's it. That's really interesting. And one of the things that I've always been curious about, and this is another broad statement, but I'm convinced that this is true. I think punk has got something to do with it as well in the UK.
Okay.
Is that let's just be objective about whatever the music is, whatever genre it is, whatever style it is. My sense is that if you're going to build as an artist in the US and make it there, you have to be technically better. You have to play better, perform better, sound better. I think in the UK, we've always given artists a bit more leeway. You can be a little bit punky. You don't have to be perfect on that instrument you play. You don't have to be super tight as a band. We'll forgive you that if you're creative and you're just doing something that's new or different or interesting. That might be related to what you've just said about A&R.
Yeah, perhaps so. I mean, if you look at the amount of recording artists, perhaps not so much in the last 10 years, but certainly in decades gone by, that have kind of really struggled to build an audience in America and then have had to come to the UK in order to do so. You can trace that right back to Jimi Hendrix, and various others since. I remember it happened with Bush in the 90s. They just
Yeah.
it's mega stars especially in the Midwest, absolute megastars. And so yeah, but perhaps that is a thing. I've never really thought about that before, but that kind of rough and ready artistic muse bohemian thing, yeah, probably washes better here.
Yeah. And you can get, again, we'd need to really, as sort of two people who work in evidence-based, area, particularly for me from a background in kind of research and insight. The thing is instinctively, instinct matters, right? And
Mm,
intuition matters. And again, I think you can have instant success in the UK. I mean, the whole art of longevity thing was based on this quote from Brett Anderson and Suede, where he was saying that all artists have a very predictable career arc, like Stations of the Cross.
yeah,
And it's the struggle, the stratospheric rise, the crash to the bottom, and then the renaissance, if you're lucky, the kind of enlightenment phase. And it was so true for Suede and a lot of UK bands at the time, because that's a little bit our culture, isn't it? It's like, we'll put you on the pedestal right from the beginning. So it seems to be overnight success. And I'm sure that's more common here than it is in the US,
yeah,
where in the US anyway, you have to go state by state.
yeah.
Here you could have overnight success. And it still seems to be a thing, right? I mean, Wet Leg, The Last Dinner Party. Those bands are in an interesting position for me. And I think both bands have been fairly well advised or know their business, because they've kind of gone away. And that's what you've got to do. Otherwise, you're going to get sucked into the hype machine. You're going to end up rushing your second record and disappointing people. And that has happened to so many bands. And I think that is a cultural difference between the UK and the US as well.
Yeah, that's a very, very shrewd observation. Do you think that a part of the longevity is the going away? I mean, distance sells, doesn't it? I mean, we're probably about I like to be bold with predictions. We're probably about 10 years away from describing Katy Perry as a legacy artist. And yet, commercially, she's done very little for the last few years, which in itself assists that previous point. So, is distance and time away from people, absence makes the heart grow fonder, etc., rather than always being there and always being present? Is that a part of it?
I think it is. I think it is if you want longevity, because if you want longevity, you could get it one or two ways. You can either keep on changing, and I'm not really talking about Bowie so much as maybe Linda Perry. She was in Four Non Blondes. She had the
Mm,
success there as a band, and then she didn't fancy that, but she writes, and so she has longevity that way. So, or you can produce. Um, Aqualung, Matt Hale
yeah,
was very successful, became a very successful producer.
yeah.
So you think, oh, Aqualung, yeah, they kind of were around for a bit and then they went away. Well, no, I mean, first of all, he made a cracking album just last year, but he's always produced and done really well. So you can have that variety of career always within just by being a musician or a writer.
Mm,
Or you have to aim for some form of classicism. You have to be a classic because that's
uh,
what lasts. It's so difficult now to have that discipline. This is where it comes to the manifesto for me, is you've got to be brave enough to step away. Even when, I mean, didn't Daniel Ek say it? You got to be, artists should be producing more and working all the time. I mean, people say 24/7, always on marketing, FOMO, you know, don't go away, because if you go away, people will forget about you. You have to have the confidence to resist that. I mean, Sam Fender, he's been working on his new record. And there's two reasons for doing it. One, you've got to come back with the best possible work you can do, which you need to do undistracted, and you need to take your time over that work. But also, you need to recover, right? So every day we're still reading about, even in this enlightened time we're in, we read about artists who burned out, Chapel
yeah.
Roan, having to cancel shows, having to say to her fan base she's not in a good place. We're still doing it. We're
Mm.
still putting artists on the pedestal and working them because of the commercial interests and all of that. And maybe sometimes it's that we want them to be successful. You're only going to do that long term if you are willing to step away from the game and just take your time.
And the accountability on that sits with the music creators, I think, because part of the research that went into my book was looking into the infrastructure that is used to curate a greater sense of artistic well-being. And I looked at what a lot of the major labels are doing in order to do that. Now, there's two aspects to that. Number one, the awareness of it. Fantastic. That's evolution. But what they're actually doing about it is, in my opinion, actually kind of very little, in as much as that they're there if you need them. So the accountability, and I'm not kind of criticizing any record companies there because they can't kind of go, hey, we sense struggle in you, come this way. It's got to be on the artist that you should kind of be able to go, right, do you know what? I've been doing this night after night after night after night. I've kind of forgotten who I am when I step into the daylight, right? So maybe it's time for me to do this. But the musician's therapy is music, right? So it's like a double-edged sword. So I find in this day and age, now in the 2020s, we see a lot of contemporary music institutions doing the same thing as major labels, which is we've got this infrastructure here, which is a referral for a counseling service. It's here if you need it. And that's fantastic. But I think it really is all they can do, because there's a sense of accountability on music creators to go, am I burning out? The trouble is, they don't know they're burning out until they start to burn. So there's a pattern there, and I think
Yeah,
it comes with experience, doesn't it?
it does. But I think that's one of the things that um, I think maybe experience there isn't that helpful, because again, someone like Brett Anderson and I probably did say when I spoke to him, is that you've got to learn from your mistakes.
Yeah, he
And
did talk about
that's,
that in that
yeah,
episode
yeah,
too. I
yeah. So,
remember.
you've got to, and he was very he was very passionate and adamant on that. But I think it's incumbent on the industry, that on the artists' representatives, actually, um, to when it comes to burnout and when it comes to mental health, is make sure they don't get to into that state.
It's avoiding it, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, because you can avoid it. You can avoid it. I think you're right. I think it's good to see labels do all that stuff and have in-house counseling and just recognize it. I think that's great. I suspect, like you say, it's not working as effectively as it needs to, because really it needs to be a third party.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you're not going to get effective counsel from the people you're in business with, because there's just a vested interest in you being commercially successful. It puts managers in a tough position, because managers, often have put so much hard work and they've put half their life into getting an artist to a position where they can be successful. So they don't want to see them pull back from the brink. But they've got a responsibility to do that. I think it's better in educational institutions. I think maybe in charitable organizations who can step in, maybe the Featured Artists Coalition, MMF, Musicians
Yeah.
Union,
Yeah.
can step
Definitely.
in and be a bit more objective and a bit more effective. But I mean, you're right. The artist has got to say, and I think now it's acceptable to say that. I mean, going back to when a lot of my guests on The Art of Longevity started out, if it's 20 years plus ago, it wouldn't have been acceptable
No, no.
to go to your label or even your manager and say, look, I can't do this.
Yeah.
It would have been a disaster, and you would have probably been talked around. Yes, you can do it, Whereas now I think it's just got to be it's got to be a lot more professional, and a lot more responsible in terms of how that whole thing is managed, with longevity in mind.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's one of the things that I was thinking about when it comes to longevity, because there has to be that sense that I guess all music creators have a sense of fragility to them. It's not a linear path, is it? It's up and down and up and down, and creative highs and lows, and that does something to a person. And some people can handle that better than others, and it doesn't make them stronger or weaker or whatever. But in that subject of longevity, that's surely a facet, isn't it? I mean, if and looking ahead, by the way, on the subject of longevity, and I'm mindful of time, so we'll maybe wind down with this question, but let's return to that longevity, right? If we look at the future, and because this is one of the things I really like to do, is to really look ahead and kind of go, where's things going? Where are things going to be 10, 5 years from now, whatever? What areas of growth do you see moving forward for music creators? And what can they do about that to support it? I've got an idea on this.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, let's talk about it, because I'm interested to know what you think as well. I mean, for me, there will be one of the fundamental things that I can see around the corner is a shakeup in funding.
Okay.
I mean, that agency I talked about that I worked at before Spotify was partly financial services, and I said to those guys before I left, "You're doing all this work in financial services. Fintech's going to be huge. Just get into fintech now." And I mean, I mean, look at where fintech is, and look at where it is in the UK in particular. That I think we're one of the world leaders. So I think fintech is on the way to solving artist funding. It's going to be really interesting for the labels, because it's one of the strongholds of a label is we're still the guys you come to for money, and most creators need money, right? They need that investment. So there are services emerging already. I mean, mentioning names, it's not really about names, because it could be the first generation doesn't work, but the next generation does. But I kind of like what Beatbread's trying to do. Duetti, has come onto the market recently. There's different takes on crowdfunding. When artists have a different route to funding, they're no longer held by the label to do the creative bit. So they can do what they want creatively. And then it's down to them and their manager to hire the right team for them, which might be a label, but it might be an agency. It might be put a team together of really good freelancers that you know. It's like what
Okay.
Coldplay does when they take their massive tour on the road, right? They're working with freelancers essentially, sound people, lighting people, videographers, stage designers, but the team, they keep that team loyal um, because they find a team that works for them. So I think, for artists that are really showing promise, I think if they can solve the funding equation and go elsewhere for funding, they've got a wider range of choices and control about who does their marketing. Just think about that for a minute. I mean, it's something probably artists don't really think about when they get signed because they're signed by an A&R person who's really passionate about them. Uh, Inevitably, they're assigned a product manager and a marketing team who may not be.
Yeah.
I mean, they're marketing a different artist every other week now. Like priority artists are only priority for the 2 weeks they're releasing their music, and then the next one's coming along, and the next one. So if you are a metal artist, you should be going to a bunch of people who really love metal and they love your take on metal. So I think that's going to change. If you're funded differently, you will pick who you want to work with and represent you differently.
Yeah.
So that's going to be a huge change for me. The 5 routes to longevity are all changing. So the idea of having a hit record is totally different now than it was before. It's really about your best songs and what you do with those songs. And I think is important, probably more important than it's ever been. Finding an alternative journey for your best songs than the charts or than radio, or even playlists, right? You got to
Yeah.
find an alternative journey for your best songs and
Totally
make
agree.
them live and breathe and work for you. And so all of that is going to change. Oh, there's a lot that will stay the same, but for me, that's the fundamental shift is where you get your funding and what's the arrangement you've made with your funders.
Yeah.
Because if it's fintech driven and there's AI technology and predictive analytics come into it, they shouldn't really care too much about how you go to market. They should only care that you hire the best team on your behalf to go to market. And then the game's changed, right? Fundamentally
Yeah.
different.
I love that. The second point that you made there, Keith, falls in line with one of the things that I talk quite passionately about to emerging artists, and that is creative licensing of their recorded music. Um, because I think a lot of music creators find it quite difficult to be able to know, for example, how their music aids a visual. They might prefer, for example, for a music publisher or a record company or anybody else that's in an objective and business mindset to be able to look at it and go, oh, this thing you've done here, great. Yeah, well, it's going to fit over here. And I don't think we're seeing as much of that anymore. And so I think that music creators need to be able to do that. And if they can't do it themselves, then it's about partnership work. But that might be a way closer partner,
Yeah,
like a
yeah,
videographer
yeah,
that films them, that works really closely with them. And I'm glad you said that earlier as well, because I think it's so important now for so many artists to be able to have that videographer. Maybe they are the videographer or they work closely with somebody that can do that. But if that same person or somebody closely affiliated with that team says, this brand over here, this is perfect. This really, really sells what they do. Or do you know this kind of like the growth of this, I don't know, health and well care thing over here? We should pipe this music into that because that's the kind of people it could help if it's used like this through an app
yeah.
or those kind of creative licensing opportunities. I think we have to go a bit further out the box than this could be on a crime drama.
Oh, well, I totally agree. It's almost like having a creative director alongside the band, or
Mm,
or a member of the band taking on that role and working with, as you say, maybe it's someone on the creative team, or maybe it is someone on the marketing team, maybe it's someone on the management team, or it could be the label, right? It's just, I mean, for so long, marketing in music has been really about route one. I mean, when I first came into the business, it was radio was make or break it. Like if you had a UK artist and you were breaking them on a major label level or a big indie level, you had to get them on radio 1, 2. If you didn't, the campaign would probably fail, right? And before that, it was MTV. Then streaming came along and it became playlists. And then TikTok came along and it became about we've got to get this to blow on TikTok, right? And a bit of a mystery more about how that works. But either it works that way, or if it's blowing up, then we sign it, right?
Yeah.
That's route one. And it's rapidly disappearing because it's been there aren't enough slots. There are just not enough slots. They're not around for long enough, those slots. There's no point getting a number one on the chart if it's just for a week and everybody's forgotten who you are tomorrow. It's just a badge. So you need to take it and use it as a badge. So it's what we're really talking about is brand marketing. It's creative marketing. It's building your brand, your statement. What are you saying? How do you look? What other content are you making around your music? You can put the music first, but you need all that other stuff. So you need to enjoy it, and you need to have a team who really know how to work it. And I think we've seen that model emerge elsewhere. I mean, it's definitely emerged out of K-pop, which is you might look at it and think it's a one-off, but it's just an example of what you can do when you take a whole cultural approach to branding as a band. So you just do it for your level, what you feel comfortable with. But you can't rely on the markers anymore. You can't rely on the playlist or even a TikTok viral video because it's gonna be there and then it's gonna go away. And so many artists have said to me, "Look, okay, I got on the playlist. It was brilliant. Before I knew it, I had my 1 million plays, and then I'm not on the playlist now. So how do I do it again? There's no point doing it again, really. You've got to build a world in which you are building your fan base, fan by fan, and then get them to work for you as well. Work on your craft, and then the fans will work for you. And there's a band called Half Moon Run. Do you know Half Moon Run?
No, I don't know them.
Okay, so they're not a well-known band. They're quite big in Canada, which is where they're from. They are from Montreal. So when they play in Montreal, they play big theaters or even arenas. And I saw I mean, they're on their fifth album, but not a household name. So really interesting from a longevity point of view, because they are the bands I'm interested in, because there are so few household names now, right? I mean, we could probably talk about bands for the next hour and say, do you know? And we wouldn't know it, right? And that could be one of our up and coming favorites. These guys are superb live. They make classic records. They don't have hits. Their albums don't chart. They don't really care too much because that side of it doesn't work for them. Yeah, it would be nice if it happened. It would be nice if it happened, but it wouldn't be the world that they'd step into. The world that they play in is the world that they've created for their fans. And one of the things that I witnessed seeing them live it was fans bringing their friends. It was dads bringing their kids. It was kids bringing their dads or their mums to see this band, because this band is amazing. And that is how they do it. They build their world and their community around them based on just the stuff that they do, which is really cool. And they have really great photos on Instagram. And they have a really, really good sound guy. So that whole creative team around them is super pro. And so, they treat the whole thing with the respect that it deserves. And they're only going to do that from within the Half Moon Run camp. No label is going to do that for them. I think they were signed to BMG, and BMG did their best with the record. That's what they're there for.
Yeah.
But your band, your creative vehicle is yours, right?
Well, yeah. But you see, now I'm listening to you talking about Half Moon Run, right? That's what they're called, right? Okay. And what fascinates me there, without listening to their music, and I very much will after we've spoken, by the way, but is if they are captivating that many people, and those people are having the trust in their friends and family to say, hey, this is great, come and share this with me, then that means that their music is resonating with people, and everything around the music is resonating with people, but it comes from the nucleus, the germ of the music, right? Now, why is it then that the music has not resonated with people further afield? It's probably just because it hasn't been introduced to people further afield. One of the things that excites me is being able to go, okay, let's get really creative on how we license that, so that people are not being people hate being force fed these days, don't they? Get into this,
Yeah.
get into that. It's like we need to be that's why, background music, production music, library music, etc., is so interesting, because it's piped into people's lives without them having to chew on it and think about it. It just aids an experience. And so it could well be that their music could well be licensed in, and I don't mean, when I say licensed, I don't mean necessarily let's get this onto Hulu or let's get this onto Netflix, because everyone's chasing those goals. I'm talking about the stuff that's more interesting than that. Let's pipe it into this experience, that experience. Oh, I never really thought about that. I see the music industry now trying to play catch up with that a little bit. If we look, just the other day, I was reading the IFPI report from this year, and I saw a quote from somebody quite senior at Universal Music talking about the role that their catalog can do to support the health sector, and the role that music can play in supporting Alzheimer's. Absolutely, it definitely can. But there's research from the 1970s that said that was a thing. So
Yeah.
it's almost like they're trying to play catch up there. Let's think a little bit further out the box. And that's something that excites me, because that music from that band could and can, and hopefully will, travel further afield.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you've just said I think it nicely explains what's really happening in the world of music marketing. So, and it goes together with what I said about funding is, labels are changing as well. So they're no longer about that pure artist brand development side of things. That's why they're talking about licensing their catalog for healthcare benefits, and that's a growing world, and there is an opportunity there. That's what they're good at, right? They've got catalogs.
Yeah.
They market those catalogs pretty much on a trade wholesale level, right? So they're looking to do big deals with people who need access to lots of music. It's going to work on that level. It's fine. But growing a band, growing your art as whatever it is you do, rapper, singer-songwriter, rock band, that's something that a label's only ever going to be transient in that journey anyway, right? You're going to go into a deal eyes wide open on one record or two records. The rest of it is down to you.
Keith, can I just say a huge thank you for being here and for contributing your fantastic mind to the music business, buddy, because there are things that you've said today that are going to be so useful to so many of the listeners. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for you doing that.
Well, I mean, you're welcome, and carry on doing what you're doing, and let's talk again, because we're all in the same boat here. I think we're all trying to help creators do what they do
Yeah.
and be successful at it. And that's a very, very complex word these days, isn't it?
It is. But we'll keep going on it. I really do appreciate it. And yeah. Thank you, Keith. Wow. Riveting, I think is probably the right word. Keith is such an interesting guy, isn't he? Especially when he opens up about his own ideas. There's so many interesting facets to him, right? And but what really interests me is when he just kind of shoots from the heart, right, and just says kind of what he's thinking, especially when we lean towards where things might be headed in the future. I think he's just fascinating. I hope that you got a lot out of listening to him there. I must say, at one particular point, and I noticed it more when I was editing actually than when I was actually interviewing him, but I was thinking, wow, I remember, many moons ago being that young kid that used to send off demos to the major record companies, and now here's the guy that they consult with, and here's the guy that the streaming services consult with when they say, this is what we're trying to do. How do we do it? They go to him. That's how amazing he is. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed it. And also, if you want to hear more from Keith, please do check out his podcast, The Art of Longevity. I have learned so much from listening to him on that podcast. So anyway, until next time, may the force be with you.
The music Relevancy.